In many ways, I prefer communicating with people who are unfamiliar with the tarot and the I Ching, because if you're familiar with one or both, it's most likely that you're using them to predict what will happen or to help you make choices. And I've done that. But what we're doing now, at least for this part of this series, is something completely different, as you can see, if you're familiar with what we've been talking about. And so I want to talk about progression or stages of movement. I don't want to call them exactly stages of development, but essentially what I'm thinking about is that a more primitive state or stage is to declare that something is wrong, something is not satisfactory. If we declare something is satisfactory, the mind may begin to bring other unrelated items into the fold and correlate them to the happiness when they're not actually correlated. If you're very attentive, you can see the mind doing this. If you're not, you may unconsciously link two unrelated things, one which has made you happy, one which may not be negative, but it's not responsible for your happiness. And that can create an attachment which is not even serving its purpose. Right? All attachments are problematic, but this is an attachment that's not even linked. So step one is identifying there's a dissatisfaction, some kind of problem or challenge that you're facing. And then step two, which is much more complex, is how to solve that problem. And those of you who know, I do assessments and treatment for children with speech and language disorders, including severely intellectually disabled children, or at least they're labeled that way and tested that way. We don't know what's going on the inside. And I will be a therapist soon, but perhaps I'm already licensed. In any case, so there's an assessment process to determine what can and cannot the student perform. And then there is the treatment, which is a much more complex procedure. But unless you, at least in the system, unless you assess that there is a failure to perform on some level, some kind of dissatisfaction with the standards, then you aren't authorized to do treatment, and you may not even know what treatment does. So I'm not arguing with these two steps. One is identifying there is a problem, and two, figuring out how to treat the problem, which often you just can't. But you try. But both of these are antithetical to what I've been talking about with respect to the confusion at the call, allowing confusion at the call. If there is an assessment, whether it's a formal assessment of the student or our own personal assessment of our situation, we are immediately rejecting confusion. We are rejecting beginner's mind. We're saying this assessment means that this performance is adequate or inadequate, or this situation is adequate or inadequate based on whatever standards of happiness or academics or intellectual ability or whatever the criteria is. So we've already thrown out confusion. We've already thrown out the acceptance of confusion, which means we're in a trial. And it's ironic that trials are the name that we use when we're attempting to test and treat children with disorders of speech and language, or adults too. It's trial and error, trial and over again, the same thing. So, we can use this process to assess there is a problem, qualify there is a problem, and then come up with treatments for the problem. But we want to remember that in this process we have abandoned the call to confusion. Now, systems do not want to be confused, whether they're academic systems like a school, religious systems, scientific systems, governmental systems, military systems, even family systems. They just don't want to be with confusion. They don't want to be with confusion. In this moment, I am recommending you just allow some confusion. The mind is so anxious, especially if you're not happy in your job or relationship or whatever housing, whatever the situation is. The mind is so anxious to come up with a determination this is good or bad and a solution. And there's nothing wrong with that. All I'm saying is, in this moment, if you declare this moment as the call, the spring, the dawn, you're starting fresh, born again into this moment, allow confusion. And trust that the confusion will be worked out. And trust that the confusion will be worked out at a future time. Maybe a minute from now, maybe a day from now. But in this moment, you're just simply being. You're simply allowing confusion. It's the hardest thing to do because we're so programmed to not allow confusion. But if you can allow confusion in this moment, not talking about the next moment, you can be present. If you declare yourself a failure or a success, you are not in beginner's mind. If you declare yourself a failure or a success, you are not in beginner's mind. If you declare yourself a failure or a success, you are not in beginner's mind. Our society is structured such that we want to be a success and we do not want to be a failure. But I would suggest to you that you neither want to be labeling yourself as a success nor labeling yourself as a failure, because what you want is a state of beginner's mind. In truth, if you are pure awareness, then you cannot be a failure, nor can you be a success. You can only be the space in which thoughts about failure or success arise. And so people may be dissatisfied with you, or they may praise you. And if you believe them, or if you move to reject them, to disqualify what they're saying, you're out of beginner's mind. Confusion about whether you are a failure or success is pointing you to see that you are neither. To see that you are neither. To see that you can't be either. You cannot be either because you are awareness of thoughts that are labeling the identity and the story as one of failure or success. But if you are immediately identifying as the success or the failure, in other words, getting rid of beginner's mind, then you are identified as something other than pure awareness. So therefore, you're lying. Our whole society, academic, business, military, governmental, is all based on this is a failure, this is a success. And we could say on a practical level, we wouldn't be able to function without that assessment. So what I'm talking about is only in this moment, only at the call, do you invite confusion and shrug in the face of this is a failure, this is a success, I am a failure, I am a success. You're not affirming or denying the statement. You're simply saying you do not know. That is a half step towards saying, I am the awareness in which thoughts that say this or I am a failure, this or I am a success. It's hard to go directly to that. People who do it are usually spiritually bypassing and pretending they're actually awareness when they're not actually thinking of themselves as awareness. Only someone who's awakened is actually seeing themselves as pure awareness, or in very brief moments of meditation, we can all access that. So, once again, all of this work, in one way, could be said to be all about allowing confusion at the call. If you're in the trial, you're already in attachment, aggression, negative adaptive child, negative free child, dynamic masculine, static masculine. I can go through Enneagram fixation, Cartman's trauma triangle. I can go through all these systems over and over again. We can just call it gripping. Maybe that's what I'll do in the future, or desire and aversion, because the systems are helpful, but they are a bit wordy. And so if we reject the call to confusion, when the moment is new, and I would say the moment is new over and over again, then we're going to have, we'll just say, desire and aversion at the trial during the day, and then in the dusk, sunset, fall, return, we're going to have judging, grasping, and regret, which means we're unlikely to have humility when we enter the Bardo. We're going to be resisting in some way. We're going to try to send some information over the gap. Those of you who are rooted in science can just call the gap the latency period after neurons fire. Those of you who are physicists or into physics can say it's the gap between moments in time, space where time arises in. You can't conceive of this as a human so over and over again, we're reminding ourselves, oh wait, I have to call, aren't I? Or I was just at the call and I forgot to allow confusion. But I can imply my ideal parental figure, and at the next call, which is about to come, perhaps, I will allow confusion. And then we just gently thank thoughts that are declaring something good or bad, the assessment good or bad, a relationship, our job, our housing good or bad, our life path good or bad, our identity good or bad, our characteristics, our traits, our actions good or bad, our ideas good or bad. All that, we just shrug and say, I do not know. And that's one step, half step closer to your pure awareness, the space in which thoughts about good or bad